Countries across the globe are grappling with extreme heat waves. EU scientists say last month was the warmest June on record, and that by a substantial margin. And the average temperature reached an unofficial record high this week. It's feared climate change and the El Nino weather pattern could push temperatures even higher. The United Nations is warning governments to take precautions to prevent deaths caused by the intense heat.
Cooling off from the soaring temperatures. As the thermometer hits 45 degrees Celsius and rising, residents in the Iraqi capital are seeking respite in the Baghdad aquatic centre. But such luxuries aren't available to all. For Ahmed and his family, a hosepipe is their only defence against the soaring mercury.
Temperatures are high, there's no electricity, and we can't afford to go to the swimming pool, so I'm forced to splash my brothers with water here.
The country is plagued by a failing central power grid, with heat waves putting further pressure on an already stretched system. Those who can afford it are spending hundreds of dollars a month on private generators, and it's not just humans who are struggling to stay cool. At this pet shop, generators are essential to keep the animals alive.
Nowadays, the temperatures are very high, especially in Baghdad. All the pets are imported from Europe, and they can't endure our weather. There must be air coolers round the clock.
And there could be worse to come, with temperatures expected to reach 48 degrees Celsius in the coming days.
And for more, I'm joined now by Rachel Cletus, a policy director with the Climate and Energy Programme at the Union of Concerned Scientists in Cambridge. Good to have you with us, Dr. Cletus. So we're hearing record temperatures are expected. These record temperatures are expected in Central Europe, in Asia, in Africa. And given that extreme heat can be deadly, how well is the world prepared to face and to actually cope with such extreme weather?
The reality is not well prepared at all. And we're seeing that as climate change is exacerbating these intense heat waves, we're seeing a lot of people die around the world. We're seeing threats to food security. We're seeing many, many people get heat illnesses. The elderly are particularly vulnerable. So we're not ready, and we have to take action right now to do better, because climate change is going to make these heat waves worse.
You say climate change is exacerbating the heat waves. Are they also caused by climate change, by global warming?
Well, climate change is definitely an important contributing factor. It is summer, of course, that's a hot time of year, and we have the El Nino weather phenomenon that is raising temperatures as well. But there's no question, scientists are very clear about this, that climate change is contributing to the record heat waves that we're seeing. We have not seen the kind of week that we saw this last week in over 100,000 years.
Wow. And of course, you said we have to take the proper measures now. Sadly, most countries, including Germany, are not on track when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. How much time do you think we have got left to stop global warming before it reaches a tipping point?
We are already in a dangerous world that's been altered by our human-caused heat-trapping emissions, so there is no time to lose. We have to act immediately to sharply cut our emissions to limit some of the worst warming.
Now, we've been talking about that, of course, since the Paris Climate Accord in 2015. So when we say we have to take immediate action and we're still not on track, that's somewhat disheartening. What sort of concrete advice would you give policymakers?
It's definitely very sobering. Everything that scientists were warning us about is now happening, and it's really affecting human beings. It's affecting ecosystems. Not only are we seeing high temperatures on land, the marine ecosystems, we're seeing these huge marine heat waves as well that are affecting the oceans and all the ocean life. So this is a screaming red, loud alarm bell to policymakers. And it's also that moment where we have to hold fossil fuel companies accountable, because it is their products that are driving climate change.
What do you think would eventually convince those policymakers, especially in the industrialized parts of the world, which are largely responsible for all that greenhouse gas emissions, but they don't feel the pinch as much as other parts of the world? What would convince them to actually change their ways?
It really doesn't matter where in the world you are right now. These record-breaking heat waves are not something anybody anywhere in the world can bear for too much longer. This week, we're seeing record heat waves in Europe, in the United States, in China, North Africa, India. It's everywhere in the world. And of course, those who are the poorest, who can't afford air conditioning, who have to work outdoors, those are the most exposed. And those are primarily in lower income countries. But even in rich countries, people are dying, people are being affected. So policymakers have to act right now. It's not just this 1 week, which was the hottest week on record. It is the trend that is really, really concerning. It's year upon year of record-breaking heat. That's what should sober up policymakers right away.
All right. Rachel Cletus there, Policy Director with the Climate and Energy Programme at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Raghu Muthukuta from Mumbai is an Earth System Scientist, Emeritus Professor of University of Maryland. Professor Muthukuta, how worried are you about the heat wave that some parts of the world are facing these days?
It is something definitely to worry about in terms of impacts, not only on human beings, especially in the global south, like India, for example, or Africa, and also other species, livestock, fisheries, corals, biodiversity in general. So it's something really, really to worry about, especially depending on where the exceedances are well over anything we have seen before with so-called analog states. We are not even used to them, so we have to worry about that.
Okay, so in mentioning biodiversity and livestock, are we talking problems, impacts on agriculture, for example, when it comes to food chains?
Yes, so the combination of El Nino, which brings temperatures early on in the year and then affects the rainfall distribution, especially over parts of India, Indonesia, Australia, dust storms, and so on. There are severe losses in crop yields, and the late arrival of the monsoon can affect just how much sowing actually gets done as well. And you will get lots of supply chain impacts as well, because what happens in Brazil will affect what happens in Philippines in terms of the market chains. Similarly, export of rice and wheat and cotton, everything will be affected. So yields drop and then supply chain gets perturbed. So the global agroeconomics definitely will get hit if we continue to see such effects.
Well, is this just a weekend heat wave, or should we be ready to face an extremely hot summer?
In general, I would not jump on weather events of a few days to plan for the future, but the combination is that we have background global warming, which has a pattern and which is warming already several regions of the planet. Then we have the El Nino coming in and adding on to that. El Nino is in general known as the mini global warming because the heat that's been accumulating in the ocean for the last few years, especially since last 3 years were La Ninas, it will get released into the atmosphere. So it will add to global warming in many places. But the other thing that's really, really terrible this year is that by now up to June, more than 3 times the number of hectares have been burning around the world, and more than 3 times the amount of carbon has been released.
Wow.
So this is really adding to already a deadly combination, and we underestimate how these cascading events can combine to create such disastrous situations. So in that sense, the combination has to be looked out for in the next few weeks to few months, because the many fires, especially in Canada, are still burning. So we have to watch out for these for the next season at least.
So your reference to CO2, is that the direct link there to global warming that's causing these heat waves?
Everything is now happening in a warmer world, so everything has a contribution from global warming, and the dryness and the increased temperatures makes the atmosphere very thirsty, so it begins to suck out water from the vegetation. So vegetation loses more water than normal in a warmer atmosphere. So all these things are directly and indirectly related to global warming. And we don't need to always worry about whether global warming did it worse and how much worse, because now everything is happening in a warmer world, so we must pay attention.
Raghu Mutaguda from the University of Maryland, thank you very much for chiming in here on DW News.
Thank you.